A reunion, two hearts. CEO Toan returns to Tu Diem after many days away. Time had stretched endlessly, each day without him feeling like a year in Tu Diem's fragile heart. Loneliness became her shadow, and silence her only companion. But the moment finally arrived, the door opened, and there stood CEO Toan. His eyes searched for her, filled with longing, regret, and love that had never faded. In that instant, the world seemed to pause. Two hearts, once torn apart by distance, now beat again in the same rhythm. Was this just a reunion after days apart, or the beginning of a love stronger than fate itself? The sun was sinking slowly behind the city skyline, painting the windows with shades of gold and fire. Tu Diem stood by the small garden outside the house, her hands gently brushing the petals of a flower that had bloomed in his absence. Each day without Toan felt longer than the last. She tried to fill her hours with simple tasks, watering the plants, preparing meals, helping neighbors, but the silence of the evenings always reminded her of what was missing: his voice, his presence, his protection. Toan had been away on an important business trip, carrying the weight of contracts and negotiations that could decide the future of his company. Yet beneath his confident appearance, there was a quiet ache that never left him. He missed her. He missed the gentleness in her eyes, the strength hidden behind her fragile frame, the way her presence made his burdens lighter without a single word. On this evening, after days of restless travel, he finally returned. The car stopped at the gate, and Tu Diem froze, her heart leaping at the sound of footsteps she knew by heart. When Toan appeared, weary from the journey, yet smiling with unmistakable warmth, time seemed to stop. "Diem," he whispered, his voice softer than the breeze. She looked at him, and in that moment, the loneliness of all those days apart melted away. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of seeing him safe. Without hesitation, Toan closed the distance and pulled her into his arms. The world outside, the struggles, the storms, the memories of fear faded into nothing. In his embrace, Tu Diem felt a sense of belonging she had never known. And in her eyes, Toan found the reason he had been fighting so tirelessly. Two hearts, once separated by time and duty, had finally reunited. The reunion was not just a meeting of two people. It was a promise renewed in silence, that no matter how far life pulled them apart, they would always return to each other. The night settled gently around them. The garden, still glistening from the day's rain, was filled with the soft fragrance of jasmine. Inside the house, a single lamp cast a warm glow, chasing away the shadows that had lingered during Toan's absence. Tu Diem set a simple tray on the table: warm tea, a bowl of soup, and freshly steamed rice. She lowered her eyes, speaking softly. "I didn't know what you would want after such a long trip, so I just made what I could." Toan looked at the food, then at her, his chest tightening with unspoken emotion. He sat down but reached for her hand before touching anything. "It doesn't matter what's on the table. What I wanted most was this: to sit here with you, to know you're safe." Her throat tightened, tears threatening again. For days she had lived with a quiet fear that he might not return, that the world would pull him so far away she would be forgotten. She whispered, "I was afraid, Toan. Every night felt longer without you. I tried to be strong, but..." Her voice trailed off. He squeezed her hand firmly. "I felt the same. The meetings, the hotels, the endless contracts, none of it mattered. I kept thinking of you, wondering if you were eating well, if you were lonely. I hated that I wasn't here to protect you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the silence spoke louder than words. It was filled with longing, with the weight of everything they had endured apart, and with the fragile but undeniable bond that pulled them together again. Finally, Toan broke the silence. His voice was low, almost trembling. "Promise me, Diem. No matter what happens, don't disappear again. Don't run from me. Let me be the one who stands beside you, even when the storms come. Tu Diem's heart ached. She wanted to believe, to surrender fully to the comfort of his words. Slowly, she nodded. I promise. And in that quiet room, with nothing but tea cooling between them and the sound of rain fading into the night, two hearts that had long searched for belonging finally found it in each other. Morning arrived with a soft glow, the kind that made the city feel gentler than usual. Tu Diem woke early, as she always did, but this time the silence of the house no longer weighed heavily on her. She turned and saw Toan still asleep beside her, his expression calm, free from the burdens he so often carried at work. For a moment, she simply watched him, her heart steadying with a peace she had long forgotten. When he finally stirred, Toan opened his eyes and smiled faintly. You're awake already. I hoped for once you would rest. She shook her head with a quiet laugh. I've grown used to early mornings. And besides, there's comfort in knowing I don't have to face them alone anymore. After breakfast, Toan surprised her. Instead of rushing to the office, as she expected, he handed her a small scarf. Get ready. I want to take you somewhere today. Puzzled, Tu Diem followed him out. The city was alive with the hum of traffic and the scent of fresh bread from nearby stalls. Yet Toan guided her not to his company, but to the old book street where vendors lined the sidewalks with colorful covers and handwritten notes. He stopped at a small corner shop and gently placed a novel into her hands. I remembered you once said you loved reading, he explained. While I was away, I thought of this street. I imagined how your eyes might light up here, and I realized, don't just want to build a future with you inside my house. I want to share the world with you, piece by piece. Tu Diem held the book tightly, her eyes shimmering. Such a simple gesture, yet it carried more weight than any grand promise. He had thought of her, even when oceans and responsibilities separated them. They spent the morning wandering between stalls, sipping warm soy milk, and laughing over small things. Toan, usually stern and guarded, seemed lighter, almost boyish in his happiness, and Tu Diem, for once, allowed herself to simply be a woman who could smile freely, without fear of tomorrow. As they sat on a bench beneath a canopy of trees, Toan reached for her hand once more. Diem, he said softly, these days apart reminded me of one truth: I can handle business losses. I can rebuild my company if it falls, but I cannot lose you, not again. Her heart swelled, and without hesitation, she leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. The world around them faded into a gentle blur. After so many storms, after so many days of longing, they were together again, two hearts, finally beating in the same rhythm. For several days, life felt almost like a dream. Tu Diem found herself smiling more, her heart lighter with every small gesture. Toan made, whether it was preparing tea for her before leaving for the office, or sending her short messages during meetings just to ask if she had eaten. Their reunion had brought warmth back into her fragile world. But happiness, she knew, was often short. One evening, as they returned from a quiet walk along the riverside, a black car pulled up in front of Toan's house. The door opened, and from it stepped a figure that made Tu Diem's breath catch. Toan's mother. Elegant as always, her posture firm, her gaze sharp, she walked toward them with the air of someone used to being obeyed. Mother, Toan said, surprised, though his voice carried a note of caution. You weren't supposed to come back until next week. I changed my plans, she replied coldly, her eyes shifting immediately to Tu Diem. There was no warmth in them, only judgment. And I see why you were so eager to stay here. She's still with you. Tu Diem lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the edge of her scarf. Every time she faced Toan's mother, she felt stripped of her worth, as though no matter what she did, she would always be the unwanted presence in her son's life. Toan sensed her fear and stepped protectively in front of her. Mother, "This is not the time. We just returned home." But his mother's words cut through the evening air. "Do you not see how this looks, Toan? A CEO with responsibilities, with a future to protect, and yet you waste your strength on a woman with a past full of shadows. She will only drag you down." Tu Diem's chest tightened, each word striking deeper than she could bear. The peaceful days she had cherished now felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her voice faltered under the weight of shame. Toan, however, did not falter. His voice rose, steady and unwavering. "Enough, I won't allow you to speak to her like that. Whatever past she carries, it is not yours to judge. Tu Diem saved my life, and more than that, she gave me a reason to fight when I had none. If you cannot accept her, then you do not truly see me." For the first time, his mother's expression wavered. Yet her pride kept her silent, her eyes narrowing as though preparing for a battle she refused to lose. Tu Diem, trembling yet determined, finally lifted her head. Her voice was soft but resolute. "Madam, I know I am not what you imagined for your son. But I will not apologize for surviving, for standing here beside him. I did not choose this life to take advantage of him. I only wish to walk with him honestly, even if the world stands against me." The words hung in the air like a quiet storm. The return of Toan after many days away was more than just a romantic reunion, was a reminder of how fragile yet powerful human connections can be. Tu Diem had endured loneliness and fear. But the moment Toan embraced her, she realized that love has the ability to heal wounds that silence and time cannot. Their reunion showed that true affection is not measured by distance but by the strength of the bond that survives it. Yet love is rarely free from trials. The harsh words of Toan's mother reminded both of them that society's expectations and family pride can be as challenging as any storm. For Tu Diem, the confrontation was painful, reopening old wounds of rejection and shame. But it also forced her to find her voice. By speaking honestly about her worth and her intentions, she took a step toward reclaiming her dignity, a step that fear had once denied her. The lesson here is profound. Relationships cannot grow in silence or fear. They require courage, both to stand against judgment and to affirm the truth of one's heart. Toan's defense of Tu Diem revealed that love demands not only tenderness, but also strength, the strength to protect, to fight, and to choose what matters most, even when others disapprove. In the end, the story teaches us that storms in love are inevitable, whether they come from distance, from misunderstandings, or from the opinions of others. What truly defines love is the courage to endure these storms together, to raise one's voice when silence would be easier, and to hold on to each other when the world demands separation.